think this one. Perfect. All right, so we're going to jump into it pretty quickly. Today, we are going to be looking at a review real quick of the reading section as far as the approach that I want you to take to the reading section that I think is helpful, that I want you to practice throughout the week. So I'll give you a few links that you can do that with throughout the week, because really, this is one of those ones where it's not like I can teach you the content of the reading section, right? I can't possibly give you all the content from every piece of English literature from the last several hundred years and, every, cutting edge scientific article. Like, it's just impossible for me to give you all that. So what I can give you instead, right, it's not like my point is in contrast to something like the math section where I know what's going to be on it and I can tell you, right, what to study, how to study it, how they're going to ask it. We don't know that about the reading section. So instead I can give you an approach that you should be able to apply basically to any article, whether it's a single article or, like we're going to look at more of today, those paired passage articles, okay, where you have more than one, or potentially a passage and a graph or a chart or something like that, because it's not always two articles, and sometimes it's actually both. Sometimes it's two articles and one of them has an accompanying graph or a table that goes with it, so it could sort of be like three. So let's go ahead and jump real quick to the whiteboard, and we will, all right, hopefully everybody can see that. And we will go ahead and talk about real quick the approach that I want you to take to this. So reading section approach. Right. Now, the best way that I'm going to tell you to do this as far as practicing, and I'll remind you of this again as I'm giving you the links as we're finishing up. The biggest thing with these is you'll probably want to practice this on paper. So what I would suggest, if you don't already, potentially investing in a paper resource, like there's a lot of good books. Kaplan makes a really good, and that's usually the one that I suggest, is using Kaplan's physical book. I've liked theirs probably consistently more than any of the others. So, and that's just a thought, again, not something you have to do, just something that I, suggest if you feel like you're not getting the fullness of practice by just looking at an online article, because obviously you can't write on the screen, write the same way you could on a physical piece of paper. And that's more specific, again, to the reading section for what I'm going to show you as far as actively reading. All right. So our approach to the reading section should have a few things. We're going to refer to it overall as actively reading. And that's going to mean a few different things. Okay. For one, students who are actively reading are going to be thinking about big ideas. So think about big ideas. And when we say big ideas, what do we mean? We mean things like, what is the main idea of the article? What is the author's purpose for writing it, right? And then what is maybe the tone of the entire article? Meaning, is this a little bit more, and I think I made this similarity or this comparison before, and I said, okay, well, you won't have the same tone or the same purpose in, if we're looking at a historical speech from a women's suffrage, movement convention, as we will from, just somebody sharing a scientific article, right, that has a new discovery, right? Those two things aren't going to carry the same tone, right? One's going to be a more informative tone, one's going to be a more argumentative tone, definitely, right? So those aren't going to be the same. So keeping things like that in mind, as well as even, universal ideas like the main idea, why maybe the author not only wrote the entire thing, but maybe the author's purpose for a section, right? Like, why did the author include, a long paragraph citing specific evidence or something like that, right? So those are the big ideas that we need to be thinking about as we're actively reading. We should be annotating. So this is a key one, because, and by that I mean we should be making notes. We should be not necessarily writing in the margins. I think that takes a little bit too long for most students. I never found that too effective. I've honestly never spoken to a student that found that effective on the test, just because obviously time is of the essence on the actual test. But we should be at least circling things. So we should be annotating, and I guess we'll put the only kind of annotations we'll be doing is circling. We will be circling some of those things like the big ideas, right? But really more importantly, we're going to be circling important ideas, things like, this we'll put in parentheses again, major quotes, all right, words of emphasis, right? And that would be something like intriguing, astounding, significant. If and that is specifically like for the science articles. If a science article was telling you that something is significant, that it is intriguing, that it was exciting, that it was unexpected, or then it's got to be important, right? That's a turning point. Again, especially scientifically, that's a turning point in probably an experiment, and in the case of the article, probably the entire article, right? So yeah, so major quotes, words of emphasis. Yeah, that's going to be a big thing. And then again, still, I would also include in this the big ideas. So if something sort of reveals the main idea, the author's purpose, it's gonna, though that's something worth circling, because and the reason I chose those things, major quotes, words of emphasis, big ideas, those are the things that they usually ask the questions about, right? So if you have quotes, that the command of evidence questions, words of emphasis, that tends to be, sometimes you could even get a words in context question, that's one of those, right? And then the big ideas, we just call those big ideas questions, actually. So the reason I say we need to circle those things is because those are the things that most likely we're going to have to revisit. So it's going to save us some time when we go back to the text to reference it once we've been asked those questions. Okay, so that's the kind of things that active readers do. And then here is our strategy that I want you to try as we go along. So the strategy for these is going to be: 1, read the question, and the key is do not read the answers. 2, consult the text or revisit the text. Say revisit. Revisit the text. And then last is essentially build your own answer, form your own answer. And then and only then do you read and choose the best answer. All right. So the idea with that strategy is that if you go into the text, read it, obviously, then read the question and revisit the text, the only thing that you can be basing that answer that you have built now in your own head on would be the text, because you can't be influenced by, oh man, that answer choice sounds really good. But if you really looked at it, maybe it's not actually in the text, right? We are only basing it on the text. And the reality is you can build an answer and you see your answer in those answer choices. It tends to be correct far more often than it's incorrect, right? Because again, all you were basing your answer off of was the text, because that's the only thing you've seen up to that point. So that's why I suggest doing it that way. If you want to, take a screenshot, take a picture, write this down if you're taking notes, because the strategy is something I want you to apply throughout the reading section. And I think it really will help you almost instantly get more of them right, just because, again, you're not going to be fooled by those answers that just sound good, but really have no basis in the text, which is a lot of the answers, because they're very, very good at writing answer choices that are like that. All right. So if you are good with that, make sure you have that. I'll actually take a screenshot of it myself so it can be distributed if need be. All right. Stop share. I'll actually put it in the chat. Well, let me make sure. Before I say that, let me see if I can actually attach it in the chat. Maybe not. Thought I could send attachments in the chat. It's not letting me for some reason, but if you guys need it, I can always send it out. But all right, so if we are good, I'm not seeing any questions or anything in the chat. Let's try and get some practice with this. Let's see. So we're going to do a paired passage right now, actually. Let's do this one. Okay, we are going to do one that it's a passage paired with a figure. Okay, so it's a passage and a couple of graphs. All right, so I want you to apply that as you go through the article. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see the article. And we'll give this one a try. So like I said, I know I hate to throw you guys to the wolves kind of like this and jumping straight in, when it's not like we can do kind of practice together like we did with the math, but go ahead and give this one a try, start reading through it. I was going to say, I don't know if I can. Let's see. say it's not letting me zoom out. Okay. So I will try and move as I kind of, hopefully that's, as I kind of see fit for the group as far as moving the page down, but I shouldn't have to move it too much. But go ahead and give this a read. This is really the only major one we'll do, because I don't want to just obviously sit here listening to you, or, having you read for too long, because obviously I want to be as much directional time as we can. But let's go ahead and we'll go through this one, give it a read, and then we'll go through all the questions together. Right, now we'll go ahead and jump to the tables, or let's say the pie charts here. give you a second to look at those, and then we'll jump into the questions. All right, and those ones, obviously, preliminarily, you're not going to do too much with them. You don't really use them, of course, until they ask you about them, because they'll ask you about a specific part of them. But let's go ahead and see. Let's go ahead and jump into these. Number 11, what function does the third paragraph, lines 20 through 34, serve in the passage as a whole? So this is lines 20 through 34. So these. All right. What did those function as a whole? So just start thinking about an answer. And if you want to put something in the chat, again, just sort of even a sort of, loose idea of, what did they mean? What did this section, this one paragraph mean as a whole? And I will keep my eye on the chat if anybody wants to share that. So let's see. And yet public transportation in many minds is the opposite of glamour, a squalid last resort for those with too many impaired driving charges, too poor to afford insurance, or too decrepit to get behind the wheel of a car. In much of North America, they're right. There we go. Okay. Much taking transit is a depressing experience, right? Good. I'm loving what I'm seeing in the chat. People don't really like public transport. Public transport is not the first option, right? They went into an almost rude description of who has to use public transport, right? Definitely, right? Anybody who's waited far too long on a street corner for the privilege of boarding a lurching, overcrowded bus or wrestling luggage onto subways and shuttles to get to a big city airport knows that transit on this continent tends to be underfunded, ill-maintained, and ill-planned. Given the opportunity, who wouldn't drive? Hopping in a car almost always gets you to your destination more quickly. Among all the other things all the other ways that it's better, right? According to that article. Good. All right, so let's see. I like those answers. Let's jump to 11 and see what it says. It acknowledges that a practice favored by the author of the passage has some limitations. It illustrates with detail the arguments made in the first two paragraphs. It gives an overview of a problem that has not been sufficiently addressed by the experts mentioned in the passage, or it advocates for abandoning a practice for which the passage as a whole provides mostly favorable data. So what was the point of this? So this is a big idea. This should have been one of those things that we're thinking about as we're reading this. Public transport, overall in this passage, how does the author feel about public transport? What is their view, just in general terms, positive or negative? What do we think, Aaron? Because this article, I mean, that paragraph certainly sounds negative, right? At the start, but then, right, good job. It does go into all these reasons, all these limitations, all these things that are wrong with it, right? But it does end up actually saying, right, the experience of European and Asian cities shows that if you make buses, subways, and trains convenient, comfortable, fast, and safe, more citizens will want to do it. So, and really, actually, even our paragraph here, our extremely negative paragraph there, actually does kind of hit on this, right? It says that in this continent, in North America, it tends to be underfunded, ill-maintained, and ill-planned. So is the problem, according to the author, is the problem actually public transport? Or is it something else? And if so, what is it? No, right, exactly. It's hygiene, it's maintenance, it's upkeep. It's saying that, yeah, guess what? No, nothing is really that fun if you don't maintain it, right? If you don't clean these places, if they're not funded, if they're not well planned, yeah, then nothing is really that fun, right? A school isn't fun if it's not, clean, and if it's not funded and it's not well planned out, right? There's not a planned out curriculum, then nothing really can be enjoyable, right? So the point is overall that really the issue isn't public transport here. It's just how it's done here. right? Because really that's why they cite other places where it's more successful and more enjoyable. So let's see. Let's revisit these. Are there any that we want to rule out, like for sure that we just go, yeah, I don't think it's that for these answer choices? Yeah, I'd say that's fair. Yeah, we can get rid of D. It advocates for abandoning a practice which the passage as a whole provides mostly favorable data. No, in fact, it's sort of actually the whole passage is kind of the opposite of that. It tells us how limited it is and how not great it is here, but says no, we should still continue to do this. We should just put more into this. It gives an overview of a problem that has not been sufficiently addressed by experts. Yeah, we can get rid of that one too. I agree. Yeah, it gives an overview of a problem that's not been sufficiently addressed. I wouldn't say that, right? Because in fact, let's see, it goes, there you go. It talks about quite a few different aspects of it, right? So it's not that really something hasn't been sufficiently addressed. So now we're down to A and B. So which one do we think is better? Does it illustrate with detail the arguments made in the first two paragraphs, or does it acknowledge a practice favored by the author? It acknowledges that public transportation has some limitations. Which one of those do we think is better? Let's see. All right. So let's see, it illustrates with detail the arguments made in the first two paragraphs. Let's see the first two paragraphs, because that's really the key, right? That's the only thing we haven't done yet, is take a look at those first two paragraphs. Though there are 600 million cars on the planet and counting, there are also 7 billion people, which means that the vast majority of their getting around involves taking buses, ferry boats, commuter trains, cars, and subways. In other words, traveling to work, school, or the market means being a strap hanger. Anybody who, by choice or necessity, relies on public transport rather than a privately owned automobile. Half the population in New York, Toronto, and London do not own cars. Public transportation is now how most of the people in Asia and Africa, the world's most populous continents, travel every day. Subway systems carry 155 million passengers, 34 times the number carried by the world's airplanes, and global public transportation market is now valued at 428 billion annually. Okay, let's see. So it illustrates with detail the arguments made in the first two paragraphs of the passage. Well, there really isn't an argument. This is where this one starts to go awry, is that there really isn't an argument made in the first two paragraphs. The first two paragraphs are just saying a ton of people on this planet use public transportation every single day. And then 20 just kind of starts going straight into why public transportation is so bad here in North America. So it doesn't really, and then that's the key that should really kind of, make that red flag go off on our head for B, is that it doesn't good, right? And that's why we have to read these, right? Because and it's why we try and put off reading the answer choices as long as we possibly can, right? And ones like these with big picture questions, this was essentially a main idea question. It's a little bit hard to wait. Obviously, we do have to read the answer choices because you can't just sort of eyeball the entire passage. You have to know generally what it's talking about or what it's asking, right? But yeah, it doesn't really detail any arguments when we look at the first two, which means, yeah, really this one acknowledges a practice favored by the author. And that's what we said, right? In the end of this, the author is saying that actually they are in favor of public transport, but they're in favor of public transport that's done well. And what are the limitations that the author says? When you don't fund it, when you don't plan it, when you don't keep things nice and clean and maintained, right? That's when public transportation starts to be limited only by the amount of resources we put into it. So this one should be A. It acknowledges that a practice favored by the author, public transport, has some limitations. Again, limitations set by when we don't care about it. We don't give it the funding and essentially attention that it deserves as being something that carries so many people every single day. All right. Let's see. So 12 and 13, and I want to remind y'all of a specific strategy for these, which is making sure we kind of use the evidence one. So use the evidence from 13 to find the answer for 12, because obviously the answer is in one of those little sections. Which choice does the author explicitly cite as an advantage of automobile travel in North America? This one we may not even have to, because the last question really, really helped us with that, right? Because it actually said in that little section that we read, it talks about this, right? But let's see. So lines 5 through 9, 20 through 24, lines 20 through 26, 24 through 26, sorry, or 32 through 34. So let's see. Let's go with, all right, let's go through 20 to, let's see. Ooh, okay, so we're thinking B for both. Let's see. All right. So 20 through 24, let's start there with the evidence. And yet public transportation in many minds is the opposite of glamour, a squalid last resort for those with one too many impaired driving charges, too poor to afford insurance, or too decrepit to get behind the wheel of a car. Okay, so that's the one we're saying as evident. Okay, there we go. I was gonna say, I was like, what does that really tell us as far as the okay, we're going back on B. All right. So we don't like that one as much, which I would say is probably a good idea, right? Because this one doesn't really tell us why. It actually, in fact, doesn't specifically mention North America at all. And it doesn't have to necessarily by name, because we do know that we're talking about that in the paragraph, but we actually we haven't mentioned North America yet, which means really that should be a hint that it's probably going to come either at or below that line where we first mention North America, so that we know we're talking about it. Okay, so B's out. Let's try C. Yeah, we had that suggestion of trying C for the evidence, 24 through 26. In much of North America, they are right. Taking transit is a depressing experience. Okay, so for 12, I would say we can go ahead and look at the answers, because again, we need some guidance, but environmental impact, convenience, speed, or cost. Being a depressing experience, does that really describe any of those four answers? No, right? Okay. Let's see. Convenience. I would say it's a stretch, honestly, to say that it's a depressing experience. Maybe if it's a like enjoyability kind of, or pleasure that you get from riding it, sure. But I don't know if they would really call that convenience necessarily, because convenient would have been some sort of evidence stating, that it was the easier thing to do, or it saved them trouble or something like that, right? So let's look at that last piece of evidence. 32 through 34 says, hopping in a car will almost always get you to your destination more quickly. So how do we feel for 12 and 13 now, based on that last piece of evidence? Hopping in a car or an automobile will almost always get you to your destination more quickly. Good, there we go. So C for, right, speed for 12, and then D for 13, right? Because that would be the evidence that corresponded, saying in North America, it's just faster to take a car. Of all the things that public transport may be in North America, which is a lot of things that it said are generally negative, the biggest thing is just it's gonna slow you down. So if you can help it, it's easier to drive. Or I should say it's quicker to drive, not easier. But yes, these ones are tricky, but they are a little bit more helpful, though. You saw when we get through all those evidence and we can jump right to exactly where in the text it wants us to look, right? So if you ever see and these ones will go to the command of evidence subsection of the reading section, always make sure we are, and of course, again, and we usually speak in SAT terms for a lot of these, and the reason I do that is because the SAT tends to be a little bit more convoluted most times, but the ACT is going to be virtually identical, and it will have questions that resemble these almost verbatim as far as evidence, and then the things that the evidence described. All right. Here we go. So 14. So now see, our big ideas are kind of becoming smaller ideas, right? The central idea of the fourth paragraph is that, so let's see, 35 through 57. Oh, geez, of course, this is the one that's split. It doesn't have to be like this. Done right, public transport can be faster, more comfortable, and cheaper than the private automobile. In Shanghai, German-made magnetic lev trains skim over elevated tracks at 266 miles an hour, whisking people to the airport at a third of the speed of sound. Provincial French towns. Okay, so what are we thinking for this one? Just based off that intro, what is this whole thing talking about? Like, what is this paragraph kind of doing for the article, as far as an article that so far has just kind of said how tough it is to take public transport? Yeah, supporting, and it is essentially countering it, right? This is very much, and it's giving a bunch of evidence, right? Exactly saying how, look, when done correctly, this is something that really does work in some places. Good. All right. Let's see. So, and actually look ahead. There we go. We should have looked ahead to 15 there because it does the same thing. So the idea that yes, there's some positive. So let's see. We can go ahead. So we did just go ahead and build answers. Let's go ahead and look around at our answers for 14. European countries excel at public transport. Some public transportation systems are superior to travel by private automobile. Americans should mimic foreign public transportation systems, or much international public transport is engineered for passengers to work well on board. What do we think is the main idea of this one? The main idea of that whole paragraph. So let's see. And typically the topic sentence, which is remember the topic sentence is the first sentence of a paragraph, or the first sentence or two. And this one starts with, good, okay, where we should be debating A and B here, okay? It doesn't have to be like this. Done right, public transport can be faster, more comfortable, and cheaper than the private automobile. So look to the that topic sentence as a guide here. Let's see. And actually, that is one of the pieces of evidence. 35 to 37 is actually one of the pieces of this exact sentence is the evidence for this question. It doesn't have to be like this. Done right, public transport can be faster, more comfortable, and cheaper. So does that support that European countries excel at public transport, or that some public transportation systems are superior to travel by private automobile? There we go. Good. Yeah, B, right? So B, and then actually B as well for 15, right? Because that's the exact line we read to get that correct answer. So very good. All right, 16. This is what we call a words in context. So as used in line 58, credit, which nearly means if you credit the demographers, this transit trend has legs. The millennials who reached adulthood around the turn of the century and now outnumber baby boomers tend to favor cities over suburbs and are far more willing than their parents to ride buses and subways. All right, if you credit the demographers. So credit, we've got endow, attribute, believe, or honor. This one's a tough one. So the demographers are saying, demographers are people who study population. It's the root of that is the Greek word demos, which means people. Kind of, it's the same root word as democracy, right? Which means people. So the demographers are saying what? That younger people are, or what? When it comes to transportation, young people versus old people and their willingness to use public transport are what? Young people tend to be what than older folks when it comes to public transport. Absolutely. They want to ride them. Yeah, they're far more willing to ride them than older people are, right? So if you credit the demographers, so the demographers are saying this if we credit them as saying that. Are we endowing them as saying that, attributing them as saying that, believing them when they say that, or honoring them when we say that? Are there any we can eliminate right away? Yeah, we can definitely get rid of A. There's probably one more I would say we can definitely get rid of. Yeah, D. D is out of there. Let's get rid of A and D, and let's really whittle it down to B or C. So attribute would be to essentially just say that they said it, or C would be to believe them when they say it, right? Let's see. So and the best advice I can give you for these ones for words in context is plug them in, right? If you attribute the demographers, this transit trend has legs. If you believe the demographers, this transit trend has legs. Okay. So having legs is an idiomatic expression that means it's right? It's correct. All right, we are leaning, let's see, leaning towards B. Attribute, okay. So this one we may have to dip into the last paragraph a little bit. Let's see. In some cities, in the process, turning the holiday bicycle into a viable form of mass transit. So that is the thing that has been said, right? That is the thing that we are either attributing or believing here, right? Is that bicycle, that personal and public transport, right, other than automobiles and stuff, is a viable means of mass transport, right? Yeah, absolutely. This one is C. This one would be, yeah, if we believe them, then we're saying this has legs. And it's saying, okay, why is it saying if you believe the demographers, if you believe the people who study people, they are saying, look, younger people are more willing to take mass transit, much more willing to take public transport. So it's saying if you believe them, what they're saying, if you believe that this is a viable means of transport, just look at the data. And it says that, look, younger people are indeed much more willing. That one's also a very, very tricky one. That's about as hard of a words in context one as I've seen, I'll be honest. The official answer for that one says, if you look in the last paragraph, the author explains the trend of people who became adults around the end of the 20th century, again, citing millennials, right? Are more willing to use public transport. The author notes, if you credit the demographers, this transit trend has legs. In this context, credit means to believe them, to believe that their assertions essentially about the trend that young people are willing to actually ride public transport more often. All right. Only a few more here. All right. Oh, we get two back to back. 17, as used in line 61, favor most nearly means. Okay, these millennials who reached adulthood around the 20th century and far outnumber baby boomers tend to favor cities over suburbs. Do they tend to indulge cities over suburbs, prefer, resemble, or serve? Yeah, prefer. I would definitely agree. Yep. They would prefer, right? They prefer cities to suburbs. Absolutely. All right, let's see 18. Which choice best supports the conclusion that public transportation is compatible with the use of personal electronic devices? All right, so if we go up, I would probably jump, and this is somewhere I probably would have had circled. Um, iPads, MP3 players, Kindles, smartphones. Um, just because this is like it really took a random jump. Like this is a very 180 from anything that the passage has talked about up to this point. But let's see. So part of the reason is their ease with iPads, MP3 players, Kindles, and smartphones. You can get some serious texting done when you're not driving, and earbuds offer effective insulation from all but the most extreme commuting annoyances. All right, let's see our options. Lines 59 through 63. If you credit the demographers, actually the millennials who reached adulthood around the turn of the century, now number, yeah, good. Yeah, we don't, that one really has nothing to do with that. That's just talking about who is using the technology, right? 63 through 67, I think is part of what we just read, right? Part of the reason is their ease for iPads. Yes, you can get some serious texting done when you're not driving. Earbuds offer effective insulation from all but the most extreme. Okay, that's what we just read. Does that back up the point that it's compatible with the use of personal electronic devices? Yeah, it does. I think B is really good. Let's make sure, let's take a look at C and D, 68 through 70. Even though there are more teenagers in the country than ever, only tens of millions have only 10 million have a driver's license. Okay, that really has nothing to do with how they're compatible. Good. And then D is 77 through 81. Already dwellings in older neighborhoods in Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Denver, especially those with near light rail or subway stations, are commanding enormous price premiums over suburban homes. Again, absolutely nothing to do with how riding public transport is compatible with devices. Absolutely, this one's B. Good job. Lots of no's in the chat. Good. All right, last couple here, y'all. Which choice is supported by the data in the first figure? All right, so figure 1, primary occupation of public transportation passengers. All right, most of them, what are the vast majority? Like, where are they employed? If we look at this, where is the vast majority? This is the biggest takeaway from this chart. The vast majority of people using, yeah, is outside the home, right? Which obviously makes sense. Absolutely, very good. All right, so let's see. The first figure, the number of students using public transportation is greater than the number of retirees. Is the number of students greater than retirees? Yeah, right. 10.7% for students, 6.7% for retirees. That's actually looking pretty good. A is looking good so far. The number of employed people using public transportation and the number of unemployed people using public transportation is roughly the same. Yeah, definitely not, right? Unemployed is 6.4, and employed outside the home alone. This isn't even people, obviously from home, I guess wouldn't really matter, but yeah, they're not even close. 6.4% and 72% are not even close to each other. So nope. People employed outside the home are less likely to use public transportation than our homemakers. This one almost doesn't even make sense, but yeah, definitely not, right? People employed outside the home, we said that's the vast majority. That's 72% of people using public transportation, as you would expect. D, unemployed people use public transportation less often than do people employed outside the home. And this one we have to be careful of, because at the surface, this one doesn't seem too bad, right? But what's the problem with this? How is this different from A, right? Because both of them, they walk sort of towards the right way, right? They are true if we just take this at face value, but they have a key word in this one that makes this wrong and A right. D says that unemployed people use, yeah, less often, because now you're not talking about amount, you're talking about frequency of an individual, right? How often does one person use it? That's not what we're looking at. We're not looking at how often they use it. We're looking at how many people out of the total use it, what percentage, right? What proportion of the entire population is using it, the working or unworking population. Yeah, so this one would definitely be A. All right, now we're looking at both of the figures taken together for the last one here. Taken together, the two figures suggest that most people will use public transportation. Let's take a look at the other one real quick. Purpose of public transportation. So we have people employed outside the home, majority. Purpose of public transportation. What are most people using public transportation for, according to the second one? Yeah, they're going to work, right? Almost 60%, 59.1% are going to work. Some are going to school, then shopping and dining, but still the vast majority are going to work. All right, let's see. Taken together, the two figures suggest that most people who use public transportation are employed outside the home and take public transportation to work. That's A. Are employed outside the home but take public transportation primarily in order to run errands, use public transportation during the week but use private cars on the weekends, or D, use public transportation only until they're able to afford to buy a car. C and D are definitely out. Absolutely. It makes no mention of week versus weekend, and then public transportation only when they have, again, no, a chart, a pie chart doesn't talk anything about someone's wanting, desire to do something in the end. Um, yeah, they're employed outside the home and they take public transportation. That's the two main points that we said from these, right? Figure one says 72% of people that are using public transport are employed outside the home, and figure two said 59.1% of people using public transportation are going to work when they do it. So, yep, we can take those two kind of the main 2 points together, and we'll say A. And B are employed outside the home but take public transportation primarily in order to run errands. Correct for the first part, very wrong for the first part, right? Even if errands made up the entire rest of this, it still wouldn't be the majority. So no, A is definitely correct for that one. All right. So hopefully y'all found that helpful. Let me go ahead and give you a link. Stop the share here, so that you can practice some of those articles. I'll give you a Khan Academy link here so that you can practice those as well. And of course, you can always get to these, by navigating to Khan Academy yourself, but I will put this link in the chat for you. Reading and writing. Let's take a look at science, because most of the paired passages like we saw today are going to be science. But just making sure you're practicing the reading, because it's one that's very easily overlooked as far as practice. But we don't want to overlook it. So let's go ahead and go to chat. Awesome. I'm glad you found it helpful. Yeah, the strategy works. You see that sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to do it on the paired passage ones like this, but don't abandon that strategy of trying to build an answer in your head on your own, because it really, really is good. And especially on those ones that are individual articles, it tends to be really helpful. So yeah, y'all, of course. All right. So if anybody has any questions for me, you can stick around. If not, everybody is good to go. Thank you so much. I hope to see you this weekend.
Bye, Steven.